nothing can stop you from accomplishing anything that you want. With the right amount of hard work, even the most difficult things can become easy. You can do it. You see, the first step is the greatest common factor. We gon' keep it real, no time for actors. First you check the coefficients, that's the numbers in front. A number that goes into all is really what you want. Skip a space, write that number down to the left. Hold up, we ain't done, cause the letters are next. Looking for the letters that every term shares. That's the whole meaning of common and the reason why we here. Once the letter is found, I use the lowest exponent. It's part of my GCF, you can bet that I'm on it. Put that down to the left, complete the GCF. Open my parentheses, divide each term next, put the answer inside. But we ain't finished. Next verse we got the factor, what's inside. Before we end it, put the answer inside. But we ain't finished. Next verse we got the factor, what's inside. Before we end it, as we factor, 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 completely factor, 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 completely factor, 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 completely factor, 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 completely. Now the question here, is this a trinomial or difference of perfect squares? Or maybe I could just do this by grouping, but that's for the extension, not these problems that we doing. So this got 3 terms, must be a trinomial, but let's make sure it might be a phonio. One term has a letter to the second, check. Next term has a letter to the first, check. The third term's constant, that means it's a number. X squared plus bx plus c, like no other. Identify A, B, and C. When A equals 1, I keep a shortcut with me. I find AC, then I find factors of it that add up to B. Yes, you know you gotta love it. Once I got my factors, then I set up 2 parentheses. The letter to the left, my factors to the right, as we factor, 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 completely factor, 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 completely factor, 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 completely factor, 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 completely. Now some of y'all was asking about the difference of perfect squares. See, the difference is subtraction right between the pairs. That means it's 2 terms and both are to the second. Sometimes it doesn't look that way, but it only takes some seconds to write them as their square roots with an exponent of 2. Once you have them like that, then this is what you do. Write 2 parentheses and nothing in between it. A few more steps take this problem to its zenith. You take the first term without this exponent. You put it to the left of each and leave it a moment. You take the second term without the exponent. Put it to the right of each. One more step as we go in. A plus between one set, subtraction between the other. And that's how we finish up this problem, my brother. A plus between one set, subtraction between the other. And that's how we finish up the problem, my brother. As we factor, 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 completely factor, 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 completely factor, 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 completely factor, 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 completely.